By the end of this day, the United States would be at war. 2,403 Americans would be dead. The Pacific Fleet, crippled. An empire that believed itself untouchable would discover in the span of 2 hours that distance offers no protection. That Sunday morning, December 7, 1941, would become a phrase that needs no explanation. A date burned into history, but 24 hours earlier, none of this was inevitable. Pearl Harbor was just another military base on a Saturday afternoon. Sailors made weekend plans. Officers filed routine paperwork. The most powerful naval force in the Pacific sat in calm water, flags hanging limp in tropical air. There were warnings, intelligence buried in filing cabinets, radar operators who saw something they couldn't explain. Decisions that, looking back, seem impossible to understand. But at the time, each choice made perfect sense. This is not the story of the attack. This is the story of the day before. The last 24 hours when everything could still have been different. When Pearl Harbor was simply home. When December 7th was just another Sunday. This was the day history held its breath. And no one heard it. Pearl Harbor, December 6, 1941. A naval base on the island of Oahu, Hawaii, 4,000 miles from the American mainland. Home to the United States Pacific Fleet. 8 battleships, 8 cruisers, 30 destroyers, 4 submarines, nearly 100,000 military personnel and their families living on and around the base. At this moment in history, the world was already at war. Europe burned under Nazi occupation. London endured nightly bombing raids. The Soviet Union bled on the Eastern Front. Japan controlled vast territories across Asia and the Pacific. But America remained neutral, officially. The public wanted no part in another European conflict. The military, however, watched Japan's expansion with growing concern. Diplomatic relations were deteriorating. Trade embargoes were in place. Negotiations in Washington had reached an impasse. Yet war seemed distant, unlikely. Something that happened elsewhere. Pearl Harbor represented American power in the Pacific, a deterrent, a symbol. The fleet's presence was meant to keep Japan in check, to project strength without firing a shot. The base itself was considered nearly impregnable, protected by distance by the shallow harbor, by the belief that any attack would be detected long before it arrived. On this Saturday afternoon, that confidence remained absolute. Sailors went about their duties. The weekend approached. Sunday would bring reduced staffing, church services, shore leave, a day of rest. December 6th was unremarkable in every way, routine, predictable, safe. The world was about to prove otherwise. 7:48 a.m., December 6, 1941, 24 hours before the attack. Morning muster on the USS Arizona, 1,512 men standing at attention. The battleship, commissioned in 1916, was showing her age but remained a symbol of American naval power. Her crew went through familiar routines, deck maintenance, equipment checks, training drills. By mid-morning, most of the heavy work was done. The weekend schedule was lighter, less intensive. Sailors looked forward to Saturday night liberty. Downtown Honolulu promised entertainment, bars, a brief escape from military discipline. At fleet headquarters, Admiral Husband Kimmel reviewed reports. Nothing unusual. Diplomatic tensions with Japan remained high, but intelligence suggested any Japanese aggression would target the Philippines or Southeast Asia, not Hawaii. Too far, too risky. His primary concern was training, preparing the fleet for a war that might come eventually, but not today. Across the base, the rhythm was the same. The USS Oklahoma's crew conducted gunnery practice. The USS West Virginia received a shipment of supplies. On Ford Island, aircraft sat in neat rows, wingtip to wingtip, grouped tight to prevent sabotage. Standard procedure. At Hickam Field, Army Air Corps personnel went about their duties. At Wheeler Field, fighter planes remained grounded. There was no sense of urgency, no elevated alert status. By early afternoon, the pace slowed further. Officers attended meetings. Enlisted men cleaned barracks. Some played cards, others wrote letters home. The base commissary did steady business. Normal, routine, forgettable. At 1:48 p.m., 18 hours remained. The sun hung high over calm waters. Battleship Row sat in perfect formation. Nothing suggested that thousands of miles to the northwest, a Japanese carrier strike force was already within range. 1:48 p.m., December 6th, 18 hours before the attack. In Washington, D.C., cryptographers were breaking Japanese diplomatic codes, messages intercepted, decoded, analyzed. The contents were ominous. Japan was preparing something, but what and where? The intelligence pointed toward Southeast Asia, not Hawaii, never Hawaii. The information was sent up the chain of command. Discussions were held. No immediate action was recommended for Pearl Harbor. At 3:30 p.m. Hawaii time, liberty began. Hundreds of sailors left the base. Some headed to Waikiki Beach, others to bars on Hotel Street. The USS Arizona's band had a performance scheduled at a venue in Honolulu. 21 musicians excited for the gig. They would never return to the ship. Evening fell. The base grew quieter. Security patrols made their rounds. Nothing unusual to report. At 5 p.m., Admiral Kimmel attended a dinner party. Conversation was light, social. Someone mentioned the possibility of war. The consensus was that if it came, it would be months away, perhaps never. At 7 p.m., the USS Ward, a destroyer on patrol outside Pearl Harbor's entrance, reported a contact, a small submarine, or possibly nothing. The report was logged, not elevated. False contacts were common. By 7:48 p.m., 12 hours remained. Most of the fleet was in port. 86 ships, including all 8 battleships. This was standard weekend procedure. Keep the fleet together. Easy to guard. Easy to manage. Across the Pacific, 230 miles north of Oahu, the Japanese carrier strike force maintained radio silence. 6 aircraft carriers, over 350 planes. Crews prepared in darkness. Final briefings were conducted. Pilots studied maps of Pearl Harbor. They knew the layout, the targets, the timing. But in Hawaii, the night was peaceful. Sailors slept. Officers relaxed. The weekend continued. At midnight, the base fell into its deepest quiet. Shore patrol walked empty streets. A few lights remained on in administrative buildings. Most personnel were either off base or asleep. 7:48 a.m. December 7th, 12 hours away. Nothing in Pearl Harbor suggested what was coming. Midnight, December 7th, 1941. The date had changed. 7 hours and 48 minutes remained. Most of Pearl Harbor slept. The night watch maintained their posts, routine patrols, nothing to report. At 12:30 a.m., a cryptographer in Washington finished decoding the final part of a 14-part Japanese message. The language was final. Diplomatic relations were ending. War was implied, but the message didn't specify where or when. Instructions were sent to notify military commanders. The notification would be delayed. Technical issues, bureaucratic procedures. It wouldn't reach Hawaii in time. At 3:42 a.m., the minesweeper USS Condor, patrolling outside the harbor entrance, spotted something in the water, a periscope. The sighting was reported to the USS Ward. The destroyer investigated but found nothing. The log was updated. No alarm was raised. Submarine sightings near Pearl Harbor were not uncommon. At 4:00 a.m., the Japanese carriers reached their launch point, 230 miles north of Oahu. Crews moved to battle stations. Aircraft were armed. Torpedoes specially modified with wooden fins to work in shallow water. Bombs loaded. Pilots received final instructions. The first wave would consist of 183 aircraft, fighters, bombers, torpedo planes. Launch time, 6:00 a.m. At 5:30 a.m. in Hawaii, the sky began to lighten. A handful of early risers started their day. Bakers prepared breakfast. Duty officers reviewed the day's schedule. It was Sunday. Reduced crew. Minimal activity planned. Church services at 8 a.m. Many ships would have only a skeleton watch on duty. At 6:00 a.m., the first Japanese aircraft lifted off from carrier decks. The launch took 15 minutes. Formations assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, then turned south, toward Oahu, toward Pearl Harbor. At 6:30 a.m., the USS Ward encountered a submarine again. This time it was clear. A small two-man Japanese submarine trying to enter the harbor. The Ward opened fire. Direct hit. The submarine sank. This was an act of war. The Ward's captain sent a report. At 6:45 a.m., the message reached headquarters. An officer read it, decided it needed verification, did not immediately alert Admiral Kimmel. At 7 a.m., Opana Point radar station on Oahu's northern coast detected a large formation of aircraft approaching from the north. Over 50 planes. Distance, 137 miles. The operators reported the contact to the information center. At 7:20 a.m., a junior officer at the information center received the radar report. He assumed it was a flight of American B-17 bombers expected to arrive from the mainland that morning. He told the radar operators not to worry about it. This decision would later be described as the final missed warning. At 7:48 a.m., 183 Japanese aircraft reached Pearl Harbor. Battleship Row lay directly below. Not a single fighter plane rose to meet them. 7:48 a.m., December 7, 1941. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, leading the first wave, looked down at Pearl Harbor. The entire Pacific Fleet lay below. Undefended, unprepared. He gave the order. Tora, 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 Tiger, Tiger, Tiger. The code confirming complete surprise had been achieved. The first bombs fell on Ford Island at 7:55 a.m. Hangars exploded. Aircraft destroyed on the ground. Sailors ran from barracks, many still in sleeping clothes. Confusion reigned. Was this a drill? Within seconds, the answer became clear. At 7:56 a.m., the first torpedo struck the USS Oklahoma. Then another, and another. The battleship began to list. Within minutes, she would capsize, trapping over 400 men inside. At 8:06 a.m., a 1,160-pound armor-piercing bomb, dropped from 10,000 feet, penetrated the USS Arizona's forward magazine. The explosion was catastrophic. The ship's front half lifted out of the water. Fire erupted. Black smoke climbed thousands of feet into the morning sky. 177 men died in moments. More than half of all American casualties that day came from this single ship. The USS West Virginia took multiple torpedo hits. She settled into the harbor mud, still upright but burning. The USS California, the USS Nevada, the USS Tennessee, all struck. Flames spread across Battleship Row. Oil leaked from ruptured hulls, caught fire, turned the harbor into an inferno. Anti-aircraft guns finally opened fire. Too late. Too few. Japanese planes controlled the sky. At 8:54 a.m., the first wave departed. 17 minutes later, a second wave arrived. 171 more aircraft. The assault continued. Bombs fell on Hickam Field, Wheeler Field, Kaneohe Bay. Destruction multiplied. By 9:45 a.m., it was over. The Japanese planes turned north, returning to their carriers. Behind them, Pearl Harbor burned. 8 battleships damaged or destroyed. 3 cruisers hit. 3 destroyers damaged. 188 aircraft destroyed. 2,403 Americans dead. 1,178 wounded. The attack lasted less than 2 hours. The planning had taken months. The warning signs had existed for weeks. The final 24 hours had offered multiple chances for discovery. None were taken. At Tensai Kangam, Admiral Kimmel stood on the lawn outside his headquarters, watching the smoke rise from the harbor. A spent bullet fired into the air during the attack fell and struck his chest. It left a mark on his uniform. He removed it, looked at it, and said to an aide, "It would have been more merciful if it had killed him." By noon, the wounded were being treated in makeshift hospitals. The dead were being counted. Survivors pulled men from burning ships. Divers prepared to search capsized hulls. The USS Nevada, the only battleship to get underway during the attack, sat beached to prevent blocking the harbor channel. Fires would burn for days. Oil would leak for months. Some ships would never be recovered. At 12:30 p.m., Washington was informed. President Roosevelt received the news at 1:47 p.m. Eastern Time. He immediately began drafting a speech. Congress would meet the next day. Within 24 hours of the attack, the United States would declare war on Japan. The neutrality that had defined American policy for 2 years ended in a single morning. December 7, 1941, became a date that would live in infamy, a day that changed everything. But 24 hours earlier, it had been just another Saturday. Routine, predictable, peaceful, until it wasn't. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Hospitals overflowed. Morgues couldn't handle the numbers. Survivors worked through the night, searching for trapped men, fighting fires, salvaging what could be saved. The USS Oklahoma remained capsized. Rescuers could hear tapping from inside the hull. Men trapped in air pockets. Some were saved. Most were not. The last survivor was pulled out 32 hours after the attack. The USS Arizona was declared a total loss. Her wreck became a tomb for 102 men whose bodies were never recovered. On December 8th, President Roosevelt addressed Congress. He called December 7 a date which would live in infamy. Congress declared war on Japan with only one dissenting vote. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. America was now fully engaged in World War II. The Pacific Fleet had been crippled, but not destroyed. Critically, all 3 American aircraft carriers had been at sea during the attack. They survived. They would become the core of the Navy's counteroffensive. The battleship era was ending. The carrier age had begun. Admiral Kimmel and General Short, the Army commander in Hawaii, were relieved of duty. Both were accused of dereliction. Court-martials were considered but never pursued. Blame was distributed. Some deserved, some not. The question of responsibility would be debated for decades. Pearl Harbor changed America. Isolationism died that morning. The nation unified in a way it hadn't since 1917. Factories converted to war production. Men enlisted by the millions. The attack had intended to destroy American will. It achieved the opposite. Within 6 months, the United States would strike back at the Battle of Midway. Within 4 years, Japan would surrender. Pearl Harbor was the beginning, not the end. Today, the USS Arizona Memorial sits above the sunken battleship. Oil still leaks from her hull. Visitors stand in silence. Names of the dead are inscribed on marble walls. The harbor is once again home to the Pacific Fleet. But December 7, 1941, remains a reminder, a warning, a day when routine became catastrophe, when 24 hours of missed signals, ignored warnings, and impossible decisions led to a morning that changed history. This was day falling. One day, everything changes.